The game of Warhammer 40k can be overwhelming with how large it is. If you're new to 40k, or just tabletop gaming in general, this video is for you. In this series, I have sought to introduce people to the game of 40k. That is right, dear viewers, we are back to GC Studios' How to Play Warhammer 40k. This episode will be Episode 2, Part 3, Which Faction is Right for You? Xeno Edition. In Part 1, we looked at the Imperium of Man and the multitude of factions within that umbrella term. In Part 2, we looked at the boundless evil that is chaos. And now, we get to learn about aliens. Yes, like most spacefaring venture sci-fi storylines, there is a fair share of alien races in Warhammer 40k. First up, we have the Necrons. To learn about the Necrons, we have to go way back, long before the Imperium of Man, and based on some lore, even before the Chaos Gods became a thing, there were a race of creatures known as the Necron tier. Desperate to escape a genetic curse, they accepted the gifts of the C'tan and were tricked into losing their flesh and souls to those vile star gods, and forced to wage an unforgiving war against the C'tan's mortal enemies and enemies that the Necron tier themselves had a grudge against, the Old Ones. This cataclysmic event, known as the War in Heaven, is what, in some books, is cited as the reason why the first Chaos Gods came into being. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But after the lasers had stopped firing, the Necrons strode out, unfeeling, unstoppable, a force of living metal. Having turned on the C'tan and enslaved them into batteries for their unstoppable war machines, the Necrons were the kings of the castle. And then they promptly fell asleep for 60 million years, and then decided right about now is a good time to wake up. And they woke up in the middle of the Imperium fighting chaos. Ladies and gents, this faction is what happens when someone watches the movie Terminator and says, I bet I can make a tabletop version of that. Only lose the Austrian and give me more of a Egyptian vibe. Of all the factions in 40k, I will actually say that Necrons probably have the biggest disparity between how they are in the books and how they are in the tabletop. In the books, Necrons are beings of such technological power that their guns can kill gods. Their basic troop weapon is a cannon which disintegrates anything it touches. They have snipers that, instead of just shooting bullets, they shoot lasers which sever nerve impulses within the body. On the tabletop, however, they're pretty much just balanced like all the other guns. A Necron warrior firearm is nothing different than a Space Marine bolter. The main selling point of Necrons is that they are unstoppable. In every edition, they've had the ability to resurrect themselves. After a unit gets shot or gets its head chopped off, whatever else, they are able to stand back up in most cases. This is helped by Necron characters having things called resurrection orbs, which make this even more effective. The Necron army gives a very strong push for characters, and this also ties into one of the main criticisms of Necrons. Based off their lore, the Necrons, with the exception of the highest noble lords, have all lost their sense of self, lost their sense of personhood. In most cases, they are empty vessels, striding forward and just shooting laser beams with no feeling, no personality, no passion, and as a result, it can be kind of hard to get attached to Necrons in the books. So as a result, both the books and the tabletop game have always leaned very heavily on Necron characters, giving them special buffs, special improvements, special designs, and it's really just because they're the only part of the Necron army you can craft narratives around. The rest is intentionally storyless, passionless. And the fact that they've got this Egyptian imagery and the fact that they're pretty much all ghost souls clinging to armor does give them quite a big imagery connection with the Thousand Suns, which The main difference between the two would be that Necrons have no magic capabilities, where the Thousand Suns, that's all they do. The Necrons, over the last edition, and over a few editions before that, have kind of struggled to really feel their own. Again, all their weapons are far too relatable to others. The only thing that truly feels uniquely Necron is their resurrection mechanic. But then again, if you had to pick a mechanic, resurrection's a pretty darn good one. If you're interested in leading an army with strong, resilient troops, an unyielding ability to just keep getting up, then Necrons are a solid place to start. Next, we have the Orks. As the war in heaven raged, the Old Ones desperately sought a way of stopping these unkillable Necrons. To do this, they created two species to fight the Necrons. One of them were designed to match the unstoppable pace of the Necrons with a raw brutality. They were called the Krorks, but they would later shorten their name to Orks. Yes, that's right, dear viewer, it's not simply a fantasy show or fantasy books that have orcs, but sci-fi too. These large, beefy, green-skinned dunderheads are, depending on who's writing them, either utterly terrifying or utterly ridiculous. Yeah, the orcs kind of have a bit of a weird vibe, where certain authors will keep them in the grimdark style, making you utterly terrified as they seem to shrug off pain, and as they stand 2.5 times taller than any man, how with one arm they can break a man's skull, how they can take even the most run-down, rudimentary, rusted piece of garbage and transform it through their strange workings into an actual functioning gun. And then you'll get the next author who just says, haha, they eat squigs and squigs eat them, and their and dumb superpower of belief lets them pretend to be a tank and shrug off gunfire, hee hee. Orcs are, unfortunately, pretty often the comic relief of the grimdark future. I should mention in a little more detail the thing I referenced very briefly a second ago. Orcs have something called the power of belief. Basically, the more orcs you have in one location believing the same thing, the more that thing becomes true. In some books, this is more subtle. They might believe with increasing certainty that they can win, and the more they believe that, the harder an opponent they become for whoever they're fighting. They might believe that a particular type of ammo is a little stronger than it is, and that ammo will become stronger than it is. And then you've got other authors that just take this into a wild direction, where an orc can pick up a rock, think it's a gun, and all of a sudden it starts shooting missiles. It's kind of inconsistent. Orcs can be struggling to stab a guardsman in the chest 1 second and then headbutting a portal to hell and closing it, because orcs be orcs. On the tabletop, the best way to describe orcs is that they're just a good time. Rules have always been pretty entertaining and not really taken too seriously for orcs. They're a bunch of big, burly green guys running around the battlefield screaming "wah" at the top of their lungs, "wah" being the favored word of all orcs. And sometimes they have rules to just blow their own weapons up. Sometimes they will just be able to double the amount of shots they get for no reason. There's often a rule similar to push the big red button, where a vehicle suddenly speeds up, double move, and then just violently explodes. Orcs can be built very competitively, don't get me wrong, but in general, the rules for orc armies are a lot of fun. Just a good time. If that kind of army, if that kind of feel works for you, if maybe the harsh, grim, dark, gothic, heavy metal vibe of some of the other factions is a bit much, the orcs can be a lot of fun. In addition to that, orcs are what we would consider a horde army. I didn't really mention it with the Necrons. Necrons are kind of in the same vein as Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines, where they're kind of right in the middle. They can be more elite, or you can bring a large number of them. Orcs are pretty consistently a horde army. You bring a lot of boys to the battle. As a result, with the weird, wonky, kooky mechanics and the fact that you do have to purchase a lot of models to build up a whole orc army, it is a little challenging for me to openly recommend orcs for anyone who's never played a tactical game or never played 40k before, because their kooky rules can be a little hard to figure out at times. and their high cost point in building an initial army can be a bit daunting. But if you do decide to get into Orks, I promise you, you will find them a very fun army. Next, the Aeldari. Remember how I said the old ones made 2 races to fight the Necrons? Well, the other one was the Aeldari, now called the Eldar. If the Orks were meant to stop the Necrons with sheer brute muscle, the Aeldari were meant to stop the Necrons with the power of the warp. While the Orks do have some limited connection to the warp, some limited psychers, the Aeldari are pretty much as psionically powered as you can really get. Outside of Chaos Space Marines, Thousand Suns, Eldar are the most psyker-filled army. They can move incredibly quickly, they can slow or speed up time, they can do all crazy psychic powers, and yes, in case you're wondering, these are space elves. We don't just have space orcs, we've got space elves too. Pointy-eared and pompous, just like any good elf should be. The Eldar are an interesting force on the tabletop. Their entire race is basically glass cannons. They're very quick, they have very good shooting capabilities, usually they're very good in combat as well, but army-wide, they're not very tough. If you can catch an Eldar unit, you will destroy them, typically very easily. This is offset by Eldar being really fast, really hard to pin down, really hard to catch. They have different abilities to limit the range of your shooting or to just move outside that range. They've got a number of abilities to teleport themselves around the battlefield. Eldar book-wise and lore-wise, they have struggled a little bit as of late. There was a push, I believe around 9th edition, where they started to pick up some really interesting characters and subplot in the side faction of the Ynnari. But unfortunately, it looks like Games Workshop has either dropped that plot line or just forgot about it. The past lore of the Eldar, however, is very well done and very interesting. It mostly consists of the Eldar, after the Necrons went to sleep, kind of leaving the Orks to go and just fight amongst themselves, so that the Eldar could go and build the greatest civilization the cosmos had ever seen. They had a massive galaxy-spanning empire. Life was good and easy. Unfortunately, it was a bit too easy, and the Eldar started to get bored. They delved a little too deeply into depravity to resolve them of this boredom. And they, in fact, are the reason why there are 4 Chaos Gods instead of 3. Yeah, as bad as the Imperium of Man is, and it's really bad, the reason why there are 4 Chaos Gods instead of 3 is the Eldar, not the Imperium of Man. The Chaos God Slaanesh came into existence because the Eldar were too hedonistic and too debaucherous. As a result, their souls are now tied to Slaanesh. Anytime one of them die, their souls get pulled directly into Slaanesh's clutches. To try to hold themselves back from this, they have created things called craft worlds, these massive ships that carry them away from the influence of Slaanesh, or soul stones, which when they die, instead of their soul going to Slaanesh, their soul will go into the stone and hopefully be protected. These stones can be put in units called Wraith units, which are then these ghostly, haunting, mechanical bodies that house the souls of dead Eldar. They're pretty darn cool. There are a bunch of sub-factions that come from Eldar. There are sub-factions called the Harlequins, where you're basically space elf clowns. They escape Slaanesh by pledging their souls to the Eldar god of clowns and trickery and theater. And there's also Aeldari pirates, and in some books there are Eldar that ride on dinosaurs, because let's go. Eldar are, generally speaking, a more elite army. However, they're kind of an odd one. Elite armies typically are both very strong and very tough because you don't have a lot of models. Eldar are very fragile but very strong. So they kind of fluctuate between editions as to being more elite and more horde. Generally speaking, if the type of gameplay you're interested in is fast motion, fast tactics, hit and runs, then the Eldar are a solid pick for you. And don't worry, because we're not fully done with the Eldar yet. Have you ever wondered what you might see if you went on Google Images and looked up goth alien elf art? Well, maybe you haven't, but there's a solid chance you might see a Drukhari there. The Drukhari are the edgiest of the edgelords, maybe only outdone by the Night Lords faction. The Drukhari are the last group of Eldar, and they are separated into their own full faction. They were devised probably by somebody in Games Workshop who set out to make the edgiest possible looking elves in the world. And as a result, they have the edgiest way of keeping their souls from Slaanesh, the goddess of debaucherous pleasures. They found a completely different entity than Slaanesh, a dark Eldar god, and this dark Eldar god made them a deal. Instead of the Drukhari's souls being taken to Slaanesh, be tortured for all time, instead, as long as they subject other living creatures to unspeakable torment, this dark god will protect the Drukhari. And so as a result, in order to escape the ramifications of their own poor actions and decisions, they decided to take out all horrible potential futures on other people. After all, why should I have to suffer if I can take out everything I've ever done wrong on someone who's never done anything wrong to me? Why should I have to face the consequences of my actions when I can just throw some poor soul into a razor wire pit and laugh as they scream? Yeah, basically take everything I said about the Eldar being fast, glass cannons, pretty good with shooting and melee, but as soon as you punch them in the face, they go down like a bag of wet cement. Take that, slap a bunch of heavy eyeshadow onto it, and a really disturbing love of skin suits and psychoactive drugs, and you got the Drukhari. Now, here's the thing. You might be able to tell I'm not the biggest fan of the Drukhari as a faction, but I will say there are two things, flavor, lore-wise, that I do appreciate. First of all, 40k has no real heroic faction. Some factions are more clearly evil, while other factions maybe you could argue are less so. But it is helpful every once in a while to read a 40k story and just enjoy the fact that there is the most villainous of the villainous, and that's usually the Drukhari. Seeing the Space Marines that in any other story do kind of bad things beat the snot out of the Drukhari makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. In addition, the Drukhari do have really interesting dimensions lore-wise. Their political structure is fascinating to read about. See, the Drukhari have an entire civilization built around betrayal, backstabbing, torture, pain, lying, corruption, but they also need to work together because if they were all to die, or if they were unable to capture live captives to torture, their souls are lost. So they have to work together while constantly knowing that they could betray each other at any given second. This gives a lot of room for interesting dialogue and interesting communication between Drukhari characters. Drukhari political dynamics are really fascinating. On the tabletop, pretty much the same as Eldar, like I mentioned. Glass cannon, little more on Horde style, but they do fluctuate a little bit, just with a lot more body horror and along with weapons with really depressing names. Next up, the Leagues of Votann. The Leagues of Votann are the newest of the Xeno factions to be added, showing up towards the mid to tail end of 9th edition. As a result, there's not too much for me to say about them at the moment. Fortunately, within these waning days of 10th edition, they have gotten some more models released, so that now there's more of an army that you can collect. For a while, there was something like 7 or 8 different models, and you just kind of had to spam them. But now they've got a number of different units you can bring. These are the Space Dwarves, going alongside the Space Elves and Space Orks. One thing that they have struggled to do, outside of the design of their armor, is to find a unique niche, primarily in their weaponry. And this is understandable. The lore of the Leagues of Votann is that they are willing to make trades with anybody. As a result, they've got Imperium tech, they've got Tau tech, maybe they've even got some weird Ork tech laying around. So as a result, they would make use of these things, maybe upgrade them, make some modifications. So that's some of the equipment you will find on the models. But it can hurt them a little bit as far as them trying to stand out from the rest. Their core mechanic tends to revolve around grudges, that they will assign grudges to particular enemies that they feel have wronged them more than others and will seek to punish them. I myself haven't delved too deep into the lore of the Leagues of Votann. I do know that they have I guess I'll call a dying god complex, where they have these AI programs they believe to be their gods, and the AI programs are kind of going crazy, which is why these dwarves have finally surfaced out of their tunnels after millennia of us never knowing they were in the game. As a result of them being dwarves on the tabletop, their trademark, along with the grudge tokens, is that they're not really fast. They got short, stubby legs, and they don't move very far. But they more than make up for it by having some of the most bonkers weaponry in 9th edition, and some pretty balanced weapons in 10th edition. Next up, the Tau Empire. Years ago, when I was much younger, a buddy of mine asked me if I wanted to hang out at his house, and while I was there, he showed me some models that he had just purchased. He said they were Tau. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't entirely sure if I was even interested, but he told me it was a part of this new game that he was thinking of getting into called Warhammer, and he suggested that I get into it. I kind of laughed and shook my head and was generally of the opinion I would never care about it. Well, joke's on me, isn't it? Now we are to speak about the weeaboo fish-faced space communists who just want everybody to get along. Alright. Jokes aside, the Tau are, I believe, the second newest race given to the Xeno sub-factions. They tend to stand out due to their vast technological difference with the rest of the setting. The whole idea behind the Imperium of Man is that their technology is barely understood anymore. Their knowledge is degrading, and their weapons along with it. Chaos no longer works with standard machines, but instead possess raw materials with demonic spirits. The Tau, on the other hand, are right in the swing of their golden age. They have specially powered pulse rifles, they've got giant mech suits, they've got huge rail cannons, they've got different types of weapons, as many varieties as you could possibly want. If you want a gun, they got a gun. If you don't want a gun, what's wrong with you? The Tau are a species that live for what they call the greater good. The greater good is a somewhat poorly defined goal, however it always seems to favor the Tau, and their civilization is run by the Ethereals. The Tau, ruled over by a caste system, control a very small corner of the galaxy. This is mainly due to just the lack of time that they've had in the setting, and the sheer tenacity of the Imperium, and the authors who keep the Imperium winning. Every couple books, the Tau invent some new, bigger, badder cannon and attach it to a bigger, badder mech suit. A lot of the stories about the Tau are pretty funny. Every time the Tau meet a new race of 40k, they try to be friendly, they try to negotiate, they try to make deals, and they always get screwed over. They capture a Space Marine to try to understand why Space Marines are so hateful. The Space Marine refuses to listen to them and just goes crazy and tries to kill all of them. Another story, they try to make peace with the Drukhari and trade a bunch of their people over as sort of a first contact, get to know ya. And the next time they go into battle, the Drukhari send out these mutated monsters, which are the Tau they gave them, horrifically transformed. The only negotiation I can remember from the lore where it worked out in the Tau's favor is when a Tau negotiated peace with some Orks by giving them a bunch of guns, and the Orks accepted because big guns go boom. The other main lore piece for the Tau is that they are actually split into two main groups. There is the proper Tau Empire, and then there is the Farsight Enclave, led by the man, the myth, the legend, Commander Farsight, in his mech suit wielding a giant mech sword. On the tabletop, the Tau are your ranged faction. While Commander Farsight is a beast in melee combat, he is the only one. All the rest of the Tau sit back and just fire from a distance. You do not advance forward, you just settle in for the long haul. Missile launchers, beam weapons that have incredible range, and a unique mechanic which lets certain Tau with less powerful guns spot for Tau with more powerful weapons, increasing their accuracy. Facing the Tau on the tabletop is basically trying desperately to dash from cover to cover before you just get blasted to pieces. If ranged combat is what you're a big fan of, the Tau are a really good place to start. Down to our final two, and these two are connected, similarly to how Aeldar and Drukhari are connected. Here, we're going to begin with the Tyranids. As the Imperium spread its forces across the galaxy, there was a question that was whispered in dark meeting rooms, with no one truly understanding that the answer was more terrifying than could be imagined. The question was this: what exists beyond the stars, where there is no more light to guide our path? The answer was that not only was there something, it was staring back at us, and it is hungry. The Tyranids are a race of hive-minded bug aliens that desire to eat anything and everything, and add the collective biomass of the universe into a great pool from which new Tyranids are born. It is an ever-feeding, ever-expanding menace. It is as horde army as horde armies could ever possibly get. You throw hundreds of little bugs and a couple giant bugs at your opponent, and just watch the melee commence. Lore-wise, the thing that makes the Tyranids kind of interesting is that every single piece, every single Tyranid, is its own separate organism. You'll see Tyranid models that look like they have bone protrusion swords, and when I was first getting into 40k, I figured that each Tyranid was one individual bug, and this bone sword was just a natural outgrowth. But it's not. The sword is a separate Tyranid organism that has a naturally hardened, sharpened body and a mouth that it uses to bite onto the hand of the Tyranid warrior holding it. Their ammunition, in their guns, as it were, is not ammunition. It's blobs of living acidic worm material which latches onto anyone struck by it and burrows into their body, killing them. The entire hive is a ever-growing, ever-changing, fully symbiotic set of organisms. The Tyranids are horrifying, and perhaps worst of all, they block out all psychers. They have this presence that just eliminates connections to the warp around them, cutting off communication, cutting off spellcasting superpowers, cutting off ships from being able to leave as the ship navigators can no longer find a good path through the warp. On the tabletop, they are endless. There are some lists you will find of nothing but the massive bug, but for the most part, you are fielding hundreds of these little bugs. As a result, they can have a pretty brutal upfront cost, and they can also have a bit of a troubling paint scheme. For Space Marines, for example, you've got armor. Most of the model is just armor. You paint the armor the same color. If you want to get fancy, you do camo. But for the Tyranids, you've got all of these various parts, you've got all of these various muscles and veins and sinews that are just stretched around. You've got carapace plate, bone plate, you've got all these different types of things that you need to be careful of. Along with the cost, there is one other downside that I would like to draw attention to, and this is that because the Tyranids are a predominantly brainless horde, there is an intelligence behind them, but the vast majority of the individual Tyranids have no connection to it, beyond a vague control that it has over them. Because of this, there's no real personality to any of the Tyranids. There's the odd exception of the Devastation of Baal book, where there's a lictor and you get to see through the lictor's eyes as it goes about its mission. But even then, there's no real personality behind it. It's just narrating for the reader what the bug alien is doing from its perspective. So as a result, as a story beat, there's very little you could read or that you could play out on the tabletop from the perspective of the Tyranids. They are more of a force of nature that all the other factions respond to. If you don't mind that, if you're in it for just the love of the tactical game and you want to field as many Gribblies as possible, pick up the Tyranids. And if you're worried that maybe you won't feel as attached to the models. You won't feel the narrative pull or story-bound influence. That is where our last faction comes into play. Our last faction for today is the Genestealer Cults. The Genestealer Cults are a fascinating solution to the impersonal problem of the Tyranids. As the Tyranid hive approaches a world, they will send forces ahead of them known as Genestealers. These bug-like creatures will integrate themselves into the population. They will kidnap and kill various people, absorbing from them their particular genetic makeup and composing a series of genetic defects that it will then begin to spread throughout the population through infections. These genetic defects will grow and change over time, causing a large number of the population to become more Tyranid-like. They'll develop ridged bumps on their foreheads, they'll grow extra limbs, their teeth will grow jagged and sharp, jagged claws will rip through their fingers. As a result, these strange genetic freaks will be pushed out by the planet's denizens. They will be pushed underground and persecuted, and many of them will be executed. The remaining survivors will descend deep underground, where they will find a bunch of Genestealers waiting for them. These Tyranids will then connect them all and give them a sense of purpose. They will feel a sliver of the connection that all Tyranids feel to the great hive mind. They'll feel brotherhood, camaraderie, and purpose. They will begin having dreams of a many-armed god descending from the heavens to wrap his arms around them and give them a great embrace. They will become fanatic over generations. And then, when the Tyranid hive is close, the Genestealer cult will rise up, seeking freedom from oppression, seeking elevation to the stars. They will destroy the planet's defenses, and then look up at the stars with excitement as the Tyranids descend to eat them all. The Genestealer cults on the tabletop are kind of a weird case. They are much more closely related to a horde army, but the most prominent series of models that they have are all individual model characters. At the time of recording, if you were to line up every single individual character model that Genestealer cults have, and every other unit in the army, they have more individual character models than everything else, including vehicles. So they're kind of strange. They really heavily rely on characters, but the cost of individual models and units to be put on the tabletop are far more towards horde pricing. They're really interesting. In the lore, their tactics have always relied off espionage, trickery, deceit, ambush tactics. As a result, Games Workshop has always tried to give them some sort of representation of this. Maybe you wait to set up your whole army until your opponent has done it first, so you're able to have prepared positions. In 10th edition, it was a reinforcement ability that if a unit died, you could put a little marker on the table, and if your opponent didn't move to destroy it, basically close the tunnel opening, more Genestealer cult members would come through. All of these have been kind of mixed successes, but overall, always very interesting. Genestealer cults don't tend to get a lot of love from Games Workshop, and that's really unfortunate, because I think they are a fantastic and, I'll go so far as to say, necessary addition to the Tyranids to really make them feel alive and narratively interesting. If you like the odd mechanic, if you like a faction that isn't just going to play the same way every time, but you can really expect Games Workshop to constantly be changing the way your rules work, or if the lore behind Genestealers really kind of speaks to you, I encourage you to pick them up. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen, the final factions of 40k. At least at the time of recording. It's taken me a long time to get this video out. Sorry about that. It's basically just a slideshow with narration, and the only reason it's only coming out now is pure laziness on my part. As for the next couple videos, my plan with the series has always been that once I'm finished with the factions, go through the game itself and teach newcomers how to play. However, at the time that I'm recording this, the new edition, 11th edition, is quickly oncoming. So rather than teach you how to play an edition that's going to be irrelevant in a couple months, I'd rather wait and see how 11th edition will play and make the videos about that. So this set of videos will be on hold for probably a good 6 months or so, and then after that, I'm hoping to bring it back and introduce any potential newcomers to the wild world of 40k 11th edition. Until then, I hope you'll stick around. I've had a great deal of fun with this series so far, and I'm excited to make more videos for it. In the meantime, on this channel, we do have multiple other videos, including an introduction to the setting of Battletech, which I hope you'll check out. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and Godspeed.